Absolute treat for me to be here. Thank you so much indeed for inviting me. Particularly such an exciting time. Your 2020 vision, I've been listening in to the interview that I think you, Naomi and Gordon and Tim did last week. So I listened to 50 minutes of that and I've discovered who wears robes and who doesn't, and who's revered and who isn't, and who tomorrow morning is going to think that the glass was half full. And not so. I've also been tracking a little bit with your series on deeper intimacy, deeper this, deeper that, and last week apparently deeper joy, which I did listen to. For somebody who thinks the glass is half full, you're quite good at joy in the end. Praise the Lord for that. You may have been wondering whether that passage was actually in the Bible or not. A lot of people it's Acts 27, in case you're wondering, not often read. But before I come to that and what it may have to say to us all, I think, about where we are on our front lines in the boats that we're all in. Perhaps you're not in a boat in such an alarming state as Paul was. I just want to give you a smidgen, if you like, of background, personal and corporate, so that I can fulfill all righteousness. So, here you are. This is what apparently you're up to right now, playing your part in the spiritual and social transformation of Tunbridge Wells and beyond. Amen. Fantastic. And we could almost have preached on the Be Glorified hymn all by itself. That would have probably done it. It's very, very good to hear that again. So some corporate background. Some of you may know if you've done Fruitfulness on the Front Line, and if you haven't, there's still time before you die, that I used to work in advertising. So let me take you to that. I used to work in advertising, so you can trust every word you hear from me and every picture you see. Now, I spent 10 years working advertising in London and in New York. I don't know how you feel about your work or your school or your study or whatever you might do during the week, whatever your front line is, but I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved the pace, the creativity, the people, and I adored the lunches. I absolutely adored them. My testimony, though, is this. I saw God, the King of the universe, do amazing things in that ad agency. Right where I was, answer prayer on prayer over those years, draw people to himself over the years, heal someone on the 10th floor of a Madison Avenue advertising agency in the middle of the day. I saw him impact the work itself. I saw him change the heart of a difficult client. I don't know if you have anybody difficult in your life, but this was probably the most difficult human on the face of the planet as far as I was concerned. But there it was. It was like Proverbs 21:1 says, the king's heart was like a stream of water in the Lord's hand. And this brand manager's heart was like that on that particular day. I saw him guide me through career disappointment, comes to most of us, character failure, and romantic catastrophes, with the emphasis on the S. Well, so what did I learn? That God can work anywhere, through anyone. And it's a joy, isn't it, to walk with God every day, everywhere, in everything, Monday to Saturday, wherever we find ourselves. Now I work for the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, as some of you heard, where we're really concerned with one thing, which is everyday faith. And when I'm asked to illustrate what we're about, I normally use the example of probably the most popular or the greatest of all our post-war Second World War heroes, a man guaranteed to save the world once every 3 years. And who is guaranteed to save the world once every 3 years? I think it's Bond, James Bond. Now, James Bond is not widely acclaimed in Christian circles, for reasons which I hope you're aware of, and if you're not, I suggest you change church rapidly. Nevertheless, there's probably not a man in this room who has not at some point imagined himself to be Bond, James Bond. And I do have proof of this. And I think it's already on your thing, yes. And as you know, you better be nice to him because the role is coming up in about 2 years' time. So if you don't want to lose your past at Cubby Broccoli and Company, do that. So the truth, though, is, most of us would like to be James Bond, but most of us are a little bit more like Johnny English, sort of. What are we going to do with that? And if you don't know what Johnny English looks like and you can't tell from looking at me, then without the glasses, that's what I do with my day job. Still, Bond has many qualities worthy of praise. Important, isn't it, when we look at contemporary culture to sometimes see the things we can affirm. He is courageous, persevering, resourceful, the master of technology, as not its slave. He's decisive and patriotic. He may, like Samson, sleep with the enemy, but unlike Samson, he never gives away secrets critical to national security. He is strong, agile, multi-skilled, intelligent, witty, cultured, and honest. And as one woman once screamed out, he's gorgeous. He's also a male chauvinist pig, an emotional desert, and a spiritual black hole. But apart from that, when James Bond goes on his missions to save the world, 5 things are true. He is properly briefed. He is properly trained. He is properly resourced. He is supported. And he is commissioned, sent out by his sending agency with authority to do the things that he has been called to do. But when we ask ourselves whether adult Christians in the UK and indeed broadly around the world feel themselves to be properly briefed, trained, resource supported and commissioned for their role in the world, on the whole, I project nothing on any church here or indeed in this area, but on the whole they tell us that they are not. And that's why a man called Stott, John Stott, he's the one on the right, one of the great 20th century and early 21st century Bible teachers, founded the London Institute, because he saw with searing clarity that though the church was very good, often at world mission, though the church was very good at doing things in the local neighborhood, much less able to help us all, whether at school or university, retired or in work, actually connect God's word to the issues that we face Monday through Saturday out in the world where we are. So the focus of much of our work is about empowering folk like yourselves, like me, like my family, to be God's people Monday to Saturday, and helping church communities help one another. So that the things that we do in places like this are indeed things that help us out there. And obviously that's very much on Tim and the team's heart, otherwise I wouldn't be here. Anyway, we've got some resources and do have a look at some of those. For a variety of team things for internally, worship teams, preaching and so on. And we've got some stuff for everyone really. Some of it you're familiar with, Fruitfulness on the Frontline. And today, for the very, very first time in history, the 5th edition of Thank God It's Monday is available on sale outside. If you want to be the first person to buy it, I'll do you a deal. You've also, if you came in, you had a couple of these things. This one is to take away, just to meditate on. And if you'd like to fill out this card and receive our word for the week and connection with culture emails, and if you like the mail stuff, then we send out a couple of resources every year. Do fill that out. Last time I was in a place with Graham Kendrick, he got a 98% fill-out rate on cards. So today, can we beat Graham? Let's see. So how might this account, Luke's account of this, Paul's journey to Malta under arrest, how might this help us in our Monday to Saturday lives? And how might it help us when we're together to help one another in our Monday to Saturday lives? Here it is, Acts 27. 1 through 44. Now, I love this story for lots of reasons. My wife has actually preached on this many times, and I'm grateful to her for many of the insights you're going to hear today. But one of the reasons I particularly like it is that we see Paul in, relatively speaking, unusual circumstances. Often we see Paul in Acts in quite short encounters with people in the marketplace, speaking on Mars Hill. But imagine now for a moment, you are Paul. And you're in a boat. I wonder what boat you're actually in. But you're in a boat with 273 people who don't know Jesus. And there's just you and Luke and Aristarchus, out of 273, roughly 1%. Roughly 1%. There are sailors, there are soldiers, ordinary folks, there are prisoners, and so on and so forth. There you are, for months. Not for a day, not for an evening, not itinerantly, just passing through for months. Now, this is a bit like many of you might be in school or in a university context or in a workplace or with the people that you connect to at Manor or at Cafe Nero or at the school gate or at the golf club or the tennis club or the polo club or whatever you have at Tunbridge Wells. You know, people that you're going to spend time with over time. Places like this. And there are many ways we might explore this chapter. You could look at it and look at the parallels, if you like, between Paul and Jonah, two men in boats, one willingly going off to share the gospel, the other one trying not to share the gospel. We might look at the parallels between Paul and the disciples of Jesus in the boat on the Sea of Galilee, when a terrible storm makes seasoned sailors fear for their lives. I don't know if I can tell the difference between those two boats, but apparently there is one, so there you go. What I want to do today is to focus on what God is teaching us and the scope of our ministry and the scope of God's concern for us. So imagine again that you are Paul, you're one of 3 out of 276 people. And what is the first thing that we notice? In verse 3, that Paul actually builds a good relationship, if you like, with the centurion who gives him leave. It's an important notion, isn't it? He's building relationship with the people around him. This is the person who's arrested him. And then one day you're praying. Imagine you're praying. You're on this boat, you're praying, you're going to Rome, everything seems fine, and God gives you a message for the centurion, the pilot, and the owner of the boat. So you are a citizen prisoner. You are actually a person who's already been in 2 shipwrecks, so you've got some sea miles under your belt, as it were. So you've got good reason to be nervous about sea travel. But you're, after all, only an itinerant teacher, a rabbi, and a maker of tents. It's not your profession, but you are convinced that the action they're going to take, if they carry on sailing, this is going to lead to catastrophe. So what do? Do you shut up, or do you say something? You can see that the business is going to go down. Do you shut up, or do you say something? You can see that the wrong decision is going to be made where you are. Do you shut up, or do you say something? Well, lives are at stake, and Paul delivers the message. He says, if you sail on, this ship is going down, and there's a threat to life. What's he doing? He's speaking, as in a sense, graciously and in the power of the Spirit we're all called to. He's speaking to power. And he's speaking to 3 types of power. He's speaking to the power of the state. This is a season when Christians must speak to the power of the state. There are great things at stake in our country at the moment. He's speaking to the power of expertise, the pilot who knows about the water, who knows about the terrain, the people who manage data. And he's speaking to the owner, that is the power of ownership, the power of money. All 3. Now, interestingly, they ignore his advice. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation when anybody's ignored your advice. I certainly have, daily. And that happens in all kinds of concepts, doesn't it? But this is wisdom from above that is being ignored. And it is important to see that there is no easy decision here. It is late October, as perhaps you picked up, so it's dangerous. It is already dangerous. And the port they're in isn't safe to winter in. So this is a tough decision either way. But what is at stake is the ship, the tackle, the cargo, and the people. Now, Paul's advice doesn't solve the problem of the danger to the ship. Because if it stays there, it might still be wrecked. But it does solve the other problems. He doesn't say, if you stay here, you're going to be okay. That's not the promise that he's so far been given. Commercially, it looks risky either way. And some of you who've been in small business or work in large ones or whatever would appreciate those sorts of situations. There isn't really a perfect solution here. We're in trouble. Now, it's clear that Paul has been given an insight into the future by the Lord. He's been given a prophecy, if you like. Now, in the Bible, as you know, we see various forms of what you call prophecy. We see God sending particular people, prophets, to speak to his own people, Samuel to Saul, Nathan to David, Elijah to Ahab, Amos to Israel. We see prophecy that relates to grand things, to the whole sweep of history, time, the fate of nations, the return of the Messiah, things that we trust in and rely on. And in some streams of the church, and I imagine too here, there's a sense of contemporary prophecy within the community of Christ is associated with people having particular words from God for people in the church. Or maybe it might happen in a building like this, it might happen in a home group, it actually might happen, as it sometimes does, it might just happen out there. It might happen in a business, and I know it has for some people. And all that is prophecy, but at root prophecy is simply this, speaking truth from God. And it comes sometimes in obviously supernatural ways. An angel, a dream, an audible voice for some people, or a deep inner conviction that you just know that this is from God. The Lord's supernatural Spirit taking sometimes his very word, the supernaturally inspired Bible, and impressing something on us that we carry with us. Now here, importantly, the word, if you like, the word of God comes to Paul in a non-religious context. He is not in church. He is not in a synagogue. He's just out there praying in this boat. Now, Paul makes his view clear. Notice in the text, at least, he doesn't use any overtly religious language. He doesn't say, the Lord has told me, or anything like that. They must know he is. They know why he's under arrest. He's under arrest because he's a follower of the way. Sometimes we don't necessarily need to label what we say with God told me, or this is from the Bible. It's spiritually discerned. It's not about courage or cowardice. It's about discernment. Sometimes we do. So Paul's giving this wisdom, but who's this wisdom for? Who's going to get benefit from this? Well, it's for the benefit of the whole crew. After all, we know from the Bible that God can get Paul to Rome without a boat. All he has to do is to whistle up a whale from the North Atlantic, swallow Paul, and he can vomit him out at the mouth of the Tiber. No problem. God doesn't need this boat to get Paul to Rome. So who's this for? It's for the people around us. Does God care about the physical, material well-being of the people on our front lines and on their economic flourishing? Well, I believe he does, and I think it's always been thus. In Eden, the Garden of Eden, God creates this beautiful, wonderful context. What for? For people to flourish in. That is his goal. Eden is a place to flourish in. The New Jerusalem is a place to flourish in. It's a place of joy. And in Genesis 12, God promises through Adam that all nations will be blessed. And blessing is never understood in merely spiritual terms, if you like. It encompasses every aspect of human life: food, family, finance, friends, and so on. So Jeremiah calls the people to do what? He says, seek the exiled people in Babylon. In Babylon. Seek the peace and prosperity. Now in the Hebrew, it's just one word. It's shalom. Shalom. Seek the peace and the prosperity. It's a big word. Of the city to which I have carried you into. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Notice seek and pray. Seek and pray. It's not just pray, and it's not just seek. It's not just action, and it's not just prayer. It's both. Seek and pray for the shalom of Tunbridge Wells and the other places that you may find yourself in, this wholeness. I wonder whether God does speak prophetically today or intervene prophetically today for the economic welfare of an organization. A friend of mine's father, a man called Colin Draper, used to work in a plastic extrusion molding, I don't know what those is, plastic molding factory, and he was a manager there, and orders were down. Competition from China at the time. Orders were down, but all the machines were silent. He's not the managing director, he's not the founding owner. So one day, having prayed, he goes down to where the 12 workbenches are, where just some men milling around. It was primarily men working there, just men milling around. Nothing is going on. And he puts his hand on one table and prays that the work would come and the machines would run. And he goes to the next one. This is in front of these people. Anybody up for this? And the next one. And the next one. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And he does it 6 days in a row. Sounds like Jericho, doesn't it? Just one more day and the whole place would have fallen down. 72 orders came in the following day. 6 times 12, go figure. Done it. If you'd done it for 7 days, it would have been 84. No, that's the truth. Coincidence? I have no idea. I doubt it. It wasn't to anybody in that factory. They saw it. So God does care, doesn't he? I think about all the little things, because all of creation is his. He made it, and he owns it. It's his. Because everything we do has an impact either on people or on creation. It cannot but be otherwise, can it? He's concerned about it. And he's not just concerned about it because he created it, he's concerned about it because his son gave his life that it might be renewed. Not just that we would come into relationship with him and enjoy him forever, but the whole of his creation, the whole cosmos, would be renewed. And so what is our calling? Colossians 1:15, that's where it is. He does this by making peace on the cross, shedding his blood there. That's what he does. So that we might play our part now in making his world, your bit of the world, the boat that you're in, as much like Jesus would have it, his kingdom come, his will be done, as it can be with his help before he returns. Sometimes people say, young people, we need to give them a vision. Well, if changing the world is not a big enough vision, or even changing your bit of the world, or participating in a movement to change the world is not a big enough vision, I'm not sure I can help you. But it works itself out in the detail. Now, of course, if you're Paul, and you've now set sail, you know that this boat is going down. That's what you know. So what are you going to do? Are you going to try to get away? You know it's going down. What is the scope of your ministry when you're in a situation where somebody's made a bad decision, but you can't do much about it? And of course, some people would argue that's precisely the situation which the country is in right now. Either way, Lord, intervene. Either way, whichever way you may have voted, wherever you stand now. What do you do? What's the scope of your ministry in a tough place, in a place where things are not necessarily going to work out? Well, the storm rages, and it rages for days, and the crew throw the cargo overboard, and everyone despairs of life. So you know this business is going down, if you like. This business is going into liquidation. Just thought I'd let the beauty of that pun sink in. Yes, it's getting better, isn't it? Not that I'm trying to open up the morning to lots of sea-level jokes. Anyway, you're going down with it. Do you pray for a whale? Do you pray for a whale to pop up and swallow you and Luke and Aristarchus and drop you at the mouth of the Tiber? That would be nice. So what's going on here? In the midst of this terrible storm, 14 nights, darkness, everyone despairing of life, with the boat heaving and the waves crashing and the wind blowing and the sun blotted out from the sky for 14 nights, and your whole body being lurched from side to side, and your stomach in your cranium, do you have any space left in your heart to pray for anybody else? Well, Paul does pray, and he prays for their mortal lives, not just their eternal lives. His ministry in this boat is holistic. He prays for their mortal lives, not just their spiritual lives. He encourages them emotionally. Here's what he says. Men, you should have taken my advice. And I don't think he said, oh, you should have taken my, no. We're all going down, you should have listened to me. Not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourself this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage. I urge you to keep up your courage. Because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Now, I don't think he reminds them that they've ignored his advice to make them feel guilty. He reminds them that they ignored his advice to strengthen their confidence in the advice he's now giving them. I was right before. Might I be right this time? You can trust me. And then he witnesses clearly to them by telling them the source of his extraordinary confidence. Last night, an angel of God, listen to that moment. Angels do, I don't know, maybe some of you have. I have not actually met someone who's met an angel, and perhaps somebody here has. I have met somebody who's absolutely convinced that, in retrospect, that there was an angel doing what was going on. But God is so determined to get his message through to the person that he sends an angel. And the angel says, don't be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial. It sounds lovely, doesn't it? You must stand trial before Caesar. Oh, great news for Paul. That's great news. That's what I want to do. I want to preach the gospel to Caesar. It's not great news for most people in the boat. They think, you're going to stand trial before Caesar? No, Paul isn't, I'm a Christian, get me out of here. He's like, I'm a Christian, get me in there. It's a completely different way of seeing the world. And it says that the angel tells Paul that God has given him the lives of all who say. So what's Paul been praying for? Paul's been praying for their lives. He's been praying for their salvation on his front line, for their physical rescue, as well as, no doubt, their eternal salvation. He is not like Jonah, not bothering to pray for the sailors in the boat. He's not like that. He's not in a class with a terrible physics teacher. Maybe you're just praying that God gets me through my A-level, or finds you a brilliant tutor who can rescue the situation. He's not in a workplace threatened with closure, just praying for a new job for himself. He's not in some grim hospital ward, just hoping to get a private room for himself. He's concerned for other people. Now, the important thing is here, if you take Paul out of the boat, what happens? If Paul's not on that boat, what happens if you take those three Christians, the three red dots that you saw before, out of the boat? There are no Christians there. Things aren't quite the same. There is nobody praying. There is nobody offering wisdom. There is nobody encouraging. Sometimes people don't know the impact they're having. Maybe the factory would have closed. Maybe the child doesn't get the support they need. Mary, at the time of this story, it's about 4 years ago now, I guess, was around 60, and she absolutely loved her local church, really loved her local church. And she did quite a few things there, but she'd had arthritis, early onset arthritis, since her 30s, and as a result, she wasn't a particularly confident person. And she certainly didn't really feel that she had a mission field. Then one day, actually, she happened to do one of our courses, and she realized that she had a front line. And her front line was the hydrotherapy class that she went to every week, because nobody else in the church could get in the pool. And then she realized that was her ministry. And then she starts to organize lifts for people and to pray for people, becomes, in a sense, the informal pastor, the vicar of the hydrotherapy pool. I don't know if there's a special sainthood in the Catholicism for that or something. Anyway, take the Christian out of the story and nobody gets a lift. No one gets an encouraging phone call. Take the Christian out. Something doesn't happen. We don't always choose our circumstances, do we? And I think sometimes there is a danger to look at our circumstances and think, this is not good, I need to go. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes the disciples are told, shake the dust off your feet, get out of there. But I wonder sometimes. Judith was a head teacher of a primary school, and it was February, around about this time, but except instead of having a heat wave like we have this year, at that particular time, it was snowing. It was that really, really bad winter when we had, we don't often have snow, but quite a lot of snow, and it was freezing. And she arrives at 8 o'clock in the morning at school, and the heating has broken. Now, I know that a number of you in education, and most of you have had children in education, you probably know that there is a temperature in Britain below which, if the temperature falls below this particular number, you cannot open the school. And in Britain, it's minus 70. No, you probably know what it is, don't you? But nevertheless, she has to close the school. And you can imagine what would happen if you close the school. You've got 200 kids, you've got all those parents. The economic impact of that, and suddenly the country goes down because this school has not been able to open. So she's on the phone madly trying to borrow heaters from here and there, calling other schools, have you got a heater we can borrow? And actually they're able to keep the school open. But that wasn't on her to-do list at the beginning of the day. And then at the end of the day, she has a conversation which I guess many of you have had in different kind of contexts where she's got to let a child go. She's going to exclude a child. And that is a heartbreaking thing to do. And she gets home at the end of the day, and I don't know if you'd had a day like that. I don't know how you'd feel. Maybe you'd feel like, let's watch 900 episodes of something on Netflix. Let's sit down with 4 tubs of Haagen-Dazs quadruple chip chocolate ice cream and perhaps a lovely bottle of Malbec. I was going to say Merlot, but I know you're a bit upmarket here. Well, you could have forgiven her for that, couldn't you? And she said, I found myself, interesting words, I found myself thanking God for trusting me with all of that. Now that is a profound, I mean, I'd never seen that before. Profound statement, isn't it? The Lord, in a sense, puts us in a place and he trusts us with the people around us. Whether he's put us in a family, trusting us with the people around us, or in a church, trusting us, or in a workplace, or at a school gate, or to a hydrotherapy class, or in a God, trusting us with whatever comes up. You're his person there. Could feel daunting unless maybe there are some resources available to you. Entrusted with your front line, whether it's a primary school or wherever it might be. And some of you, no doubt, are in very tough contexts, perhaps domestically and perhaps out there, very tough contexts. And in a sense, in that struggle, the Lord is trusting you, that with the help of others, by His Spirit and His Word, light, as we said, might come. We seek the shalom of the places that the Lord has put us in. We are, if you like, stewards there. Stewards of our context, stewards of opportunity, and stewards of people. And it's interesting as you think about, and I know you're thinking about missional communities and other things like that, and one of the things is that as churches often rightly look at their town and they go, is there a social project we can get involved in? Is there something we can connect to? And I know you're going to come behind some of the mental health stuff in church in the town. That's absolutely fantastic. But actually, who comes across people in need? Well, supposing you're a teacher, or supposing you're teaching in a primary school where actually one of the schools in the area which isn't that affluent, well, the chances are that 25% of those children are living in poverty then. So who's looking at the poor every day? Or maybe you're an executive and you zoom up perhaps to London to an office that's cleaned at 5 o'clock in the morning by people on the minimum wage, which is impossible to live on in London. Or you walk past the lollipop person and think, I wonder what they make. Or you're the receptionist in the doctor's office. Who sees the poor? Or you're a police person. Or actually, there's a lot more poor people, a lot more people obviously in need. So what kind of imagination do we have? A little while ago I was in a place called Lymington, which is like Tunbridge Wells except with yachts. And in that town there's a place called Penningfield, and within Penningfield there's a really, really deprived area. The other schools in Lymington get 90 or 92, whatever the grade is. This one gets 42. So that's really tough place to be. So the question was, what do we do about that? Now, normally a church would, and rightly so, and these are good things to do. They'd go in with some project. But actually the first thing that the church did was sent in 6 readers into that school to read. 2 of them were men. Now I realize there are still some places where men are significantly valuable. And reading to children is one of them, because there are virtually very few men in primary education. So it's hugely significant. If you've got some time, go and read to children if you're a man. And then one of the teachers who'd been in one of the 1992 schools just felt that, God was calling her to go and work in this really quite difficult place, where the first time one of the readers went in, there was a child running down a corridor, holding a chair, chasing a teacher. It's It's bad enough the other way around, but this is alarming, isn't it? And she felt called to go there. And then a vacancy came up on the governorship. And of course, one of the ways that many of you could contribute, I'm not saying you should do this, I'm just saying as a church, suddenly there's somebody in there who's a governor. And it happens to be somebody, this is a very small primary school, happens to be the treasurer of the Oasis Trust, which has 53 schools around the country, so has a bit of experience of education and how to make things happen. Unbelievable gift. So how do we do things? Well, sometimes we do things that have an impact on the town by just noticing where some of us are and thinking, what would help you? How can I be your Luke and Aristarchus in the boat? Or can I be those people who were certainly praying for Paul when he went off on that voyage? Can I be one of those? God has graciously given the lives of all who sail with you. And when he says this, he doesn't name Jesus. He doesn't name the God he follows and serves, but he does make it clear that this God, the one that he follows, is the one who's guaranteeing their safety and the safety of the passengers and the crew. And at one level, he doesn't need to right now, does he? Because they're all going to be saved. And when they're saved, there's the moment. Prove it. Right, okay. Doesn't have to say it then. And he's confirming, too, that he's just not intimidated by the prospect of speaking to Caesar. He's also making it clear that God wants Caesar to hear the gospel. That's quite a message to a crew of sailors in the Roman Empire. God is going to work through a provincial tent maker to speak to the ruler of the Roman Empire. Run the probabilities on that one. Now, what's he doing? He's just bearing witness of God's action in his life, of what he's experienced about Jesus. Does he lay out the whole gospel at this point in all its fullness? No, he doesn't. But would people be intrigued? I would expect you would. Might they wonder if this God is real? I suspect they would. Might they come to Paul and ask about it? I suspect they might. And so on. So he's just bearing witness, sharing what the good news means to him on this day. How did you put up with that bad-tempered boss? How did you get through that very difficult time of illness in your family? How did you get that job done on time? I remember once I had so much to do on this particular day that it was absolutely impossible for me to do it. But actually, it sort of all needed to get done. Sometimes in advertising, there is a certain level of urgency. Usually nobody's going to die, but there is a certain level of urgency. There are deadlines. I prayed and I asked everyone to pray, and the day just kind of flowed. Every time I called someone up, they were there. Every time I walked around the agency and got in a lift, I mean, it's an elevator, it was in America. Somebody I needed to talk to was there. Pretty soon I was kind of walking around as if I was hovering, just thinking, it's just going to be fine. It's going to be great. I'm not saying that has ever happened again. But it did happen that day. It was totally remarkable. The more you involve God in the little things, the richer your testimony. So God encourages emotionally, he witnesses clearly, he strengthens them physically, and he strengthens them by offering them something to eat. Notice, very practical, kind of Jewish mother kind of thing. Eat, my boy, eat. I come from a Jewish background, if you haven't picked that up yet. And I urge you to take some food. So we care for people's physical well-being. The colleague who can't get away from their desk because they've got too much to do. A student who, for all kinds of reasons, suddenly find themselves with 6,000 words left to write on the influence of Jean-Paul Sartre on the music of One Direction. And this essay has to be emailed to the lecturer's inbox tomorrow by 4 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Can I get you a sandwich, a coffee, a whole load of Red Bull? Who knows? Person at home caring for someone, can I bring them a meal? So Paul is caring for heart, mind, body, spirit. And then he does something odd, really, in our culture. He prays in public. He says grace in public. Now, he's not just giving thanks when he says this. He's not just giving thanks, is it? By inviting them to eat, he's inviting them to trust that they're going to live. When they take that food, they're going, okay, I could live, so this is worth eating. He's involving them, in a sense, in a step of faith. I'm not going to die. So I'm eating. You eat too. It's interesting, isn't it, about public space. And, there are a variety of people. A while back, Katrina's here, was working in an NHS hospital locally. And on Sunday, as it happened, she got a very strong intimation from God that something bad was going to happen the following morning. So she prayed about being ready, and she didn't know what it was going to be. And on the following morning, she went into work, and the theatre team she worked with were called into the staff room to be informed that one of her colleagues, who had a 6-year-old boy, the 6-year-old boy had climbed out of a first-floor window, fallen out of the window, and had died. And the person who delivered the news said something like this, and do pray for her. Now that is startling enough, isn't it, in an NHS context these days, just to say that. And then Katrina said, well, let's do it now. And then she prayed in an NHS staff room with a mixture of Christians and people who weren't, people of other faiths, Hindus, Muslims, agnostics, atheists, Jewish people, whatever. But the point is, at that moment, in the pain and shock that everyone was in this bewildering situation, the message was, the NHS has done all that the NHS can do, but there is a God. And we can bring this pain and share it with him. No one came up afterwards and said, you're fired. No one complained. Compassion. Well, there's something else, as perhaps you've noticed, there's something else about the words here. He took some bread and gave thanks, and then he broke it, and you'll be familiar with those words from elsewhere, won't we? From the Last Supper, and indeed, the road to Emmaus. For those with eyes to see, Paul is doing something different. He's holding up the bread of life. For him, it was the bread of life. He took the bread and broke it. And certainly for Luke, that's how Luke understands it. So he protects them practically in the end. He stops the sailors abandoning ship, and the centurion listens to him. And so here is Paul, a multi-dimensional ministry in his context, a place of enormous pressure. Perhaps in some places, that's what you're facing. I wonder what boat you are in and who's with you. What's on their minds? What is God doing where you are? What might he do? What does he want you to do? And let's remember in this that Paul has a rich ministry, but who is this God? What is God providing? Well, the Lord sends with purpose. Sorry, I haven't got that slide, but let me say it to you then. The Lord sends us with purpose, as he sent him with a purpose. He grants him favor amongst non-believers. Perhaps he's done that with you. He gives wisdom from above. He communicates through the angel. He responds to our prayers. He strengthens his people by word and his presence. He keeps his promises. No one is lost. And he fulfills his purposes. The gospel will be preached. This is our God. These are the same resources we have as Paul had. All of that. Now, he had two people. How do you stand together on your front line? I realize I'm over, but I'm going to do this bit. This is, in some ways, if that's all right. This is an application, because what we're talking about here is actually very, very hard to do in reality. That is, to have a collective vision for our individual callings. It's easier in churches to pray for things that we all do together. A missional community, yes, we can do that. Reaching out into a part of the town with a project, we could do that. Running Alpha or Christianity Explored, we can do that. But when it comes to you as an individual, it's much harder for us to have to do that together. And one of the reasons for this is that most praying in small groups or in triplets or pairs or however you do it tends to be what you might call pressure point praying. Let me take you to that. That is, think to the last time you were in a small group, and you go around and say, what would you like prayer for? Well, when this happened to me, there were 8 people in the room, and I remember only 2 people had prayer requests. How could that be? One of them was literally a 100-year-old aunt, and the other one was a work crisis. And there was no other prayer requests. The person who was the assistant head of a primary school who's trying to change that school, who does cap money for the parents and all that kind of stuff, no prayer requests. The person who's ministering at Watford Football Club as a graphic designer is concerned for the people around, no prayer requests. Nobody had any prayer requests. Why? Because there was no crisis. Only crisis or pressure allows us, often gives us permission to pray together. in small groups, which is the heart of many churches' lives. And pressure point prayers, of course we've got to pray them. We stand with people who are in pressure, of course, but they're reactive and they tend, unless somebody's in long-term illness, to be short-term. The key to this is something quite difficult, which is to start praying kingdom purpose prayers when you are together. What does God want you to do in that place? Who are the people that are on his heart for you to preach? And when you start to pray those prayers, even though there is no crisis, when you start to involve one another in your places, then things change. I'm not saying you can't do it on your own. People have been doing it on their own. It's not the Lord's way, though. We have yet to see churches in this country where that happens, to see what God might start to do through the prayers of his people, through people like Bond being sent out, but resourced and ongoingly supported. So every day, Lord, you send us, your people, out into your world, to the places that we normally go, to the people we normally see, to do the things we normally do. Help us in those contexts to show and share your wisdom, your hope, your light, your joy. Strengthen us for it, Lord, through the things that we do and how we do it, the things that we say and how we say it. May the Lord bless you and enable you together to work out the implications of this word for you this day, this week, and in the coming months. Amen.